Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Today is Thursday, October 22nd, 2020. I'll be sure to get you out of here in time if you want to watch the presidential debate, although some of you might look for the opportunity to not watch the debate, which, of course, you're welcome to do. But tonight's broadcast, tonight's format is really just me talking about any questions or topics that you're interested in. If you are an extended family member or friend of an Evoke client, please feel free to submit a question. You can submit them if you're a parent. You can submit them for and in behalf of a grandparent or a sibling or a close family friend. And most importantly, let me know if you're not a parent, what your relationship is to the client and what your age is. Just because if I'm talking to a younger audience, I want to make sure that I'm speaking to my audience in a way that makes sense. So with that, let me get into the first question and submit your questions at any time. The first question that comes through is, my son is transitioning to aftercare next week. At his age, he will receive his phone as soon as he arrives. What guidance can you offer, as we know he will want to connect with peers? It's a great question. I think first and foremost is that if the program is designed for, I assume he's a young adult because you say at his age he'll get his phone back. So if the program is designed for him to get his phone back, then I don't think you have to give a lot of counsel or advice. I don't think there'll be anything shocking. You can ask questions, you can be curious, you can have a dialogue or a discussion about that, but I don't believe that a program is going to be designed in such a way that it relies on you to say the right thing or the proper thing to prepare your child for that. I assume it's built into their policies, their procedures, their culture. Now, and that might sound a little bit harsh to say the program is designed that you don't have to say the right thing. But pulling back a little bit from your question, I think it speaks to this idea that I'll get into just a moment, which is that I think we think as parents that the most important thing that happens between us and our children often is our communication in terms of what we say to them. I've said this for decades now, that clients in our program have memorized your lectures, your advice. We know that because after they're with us for 4 or 5 weeks, they're giving those lectures and that advice to the newer students, the newer clients in the group. So I learned a long time ago that children aren't missing information. They're not missing data or facts. And that if you find yourself really bursting at the seams with the desire to give your child a lesson or an idea, I would say 1 or 2 sentences and then you walk away. I call it, in the journey of the heroic parent, I call it the grocery store lecture. I discovered it when I was bringing my children to the grocery store. I like to do the grocery shopping, bringing my children to the grocery store one at a time. And I would say something to them and then I would ask them to go get milk. Or I would go off and get milk. The idea being that I want to keep it short and I want to be the one that breaks eye contact, if you will, that breaks the conversation. So the child doesn't have this fear and this experience and this pattern of you lecturing on and on and on. Lecturing might be at this point the least important exchange between the two of you. And I'm not suggesting that you said lecturing was the thing, but I don't think at this point that the difference is that you need to give them a story or an anecdote or share with them a principle that'll help them steer away from it. The program is designed for them to discover it themselves, for them to experiment with the freedom, the new balls to juggle, if you will, the new exposure, the new temptations, the new distractions, and then to see what we get with that. See, programs, as we kind of move our way down from levels of care, programs are designed to have built into them more and more of the difficulties, the struggles, the detours. we want it to be more like real life, which also speaks to a principle. As if you're at the point in your child's stay where you're thinking about next steps, the more freedom there is, the more difficult it is going to be for you. The less that you're insulated from the struggle, the less that you're protected from a child's setbacks. So you're, in essence, you're signing up for a little bit more of a mess. The mistake that therapists have made, from my vantage point in my career, the mistakes that therapists have made is that we have tried to over control clients and students and families because we were anxious and worried about setbacks. We were anxious about reactivity, about black and white thinking kind of responses to situations. So, as you grow and mature as a therapist and as we grow as a program over the years, we invite more of the mess. We would rather have the mess occur at Evoke so that you get to deal with it in real time than to have this kind of controlled, contrived, ideal environment and then send you off home or to the next step and have you deal with the challenges that come with other opportunities, both positive and negative. So, long answer to a simple question. I don't think there's really anything you can say. If there's one or two principles that you feel that you just can't not say, literally keep it to one or two sentences, offer it in the form that we suggest in the 8 tools, the 8 tools broadcast, podcast, and blog that we have. And actually, it's also a chapter in my book where you offer advice, if I can use that word, in the form of here's what's worked for me, or here's my thought, or you might consider this, or this might be helpful, and then walk away from it as quickly as possible. So those are my thoughts. The next question comes up is when you see unhealthy behavior in your 23-year-old child, how much should you intervene? It's a great question. I'm going to pull it apart for the purpose of answering it. Number one, the word should is a problem in that sentence. I know that might be annoying to you all when I or other therapists are unwilling to answer should questions. I get that. But the reason that we're unwilling to answer it or not inclined to answer it is because we don't believe in the word. This is the essence. I've shared this quote, and I've been in love with this quote recently, and I've heard it before, but for some reason, in the last 2 weeks, it's just really impacted me. The quote that I've shared with you from Albert Einstein that says that you cannot solve a problem at the same level of consciousness in which the problem was created. Right? That idea that he's sharing is at the core of what I think really good quality parenting curriculum is, which is you can't get it right. There's the idea of trying to kind of figure out and discover what the right way is a fool's errand. You just get to do it your way. You just get to do it your way, and then you get to choose how to lose. Now, getting more specifically and coming closer to answering your question with a 23-year-old, it depends on several factors. Are you supporting them? Are they living at home? How involved are you in their life structurally and financially? The more so, the more you have a say around your boundaries. But again, I would emphasize more around boundaries and expectations, not about what they should be doing or thinking, feeling or believing or behaving, right? Just like, here's my boundary. It might be weird. I might be old-fashioned. I might be neurotic. I might be anxious, but here's my boundary. Here's my expectation. Here's my limit. And then also just making sure that you at least are grappling with the idea that even after all of the treatment that your child gets at Evoke or perhaps even subsequent to Evoke, even after all that treatment, your child is not going to get it right. They're going to struggle and make mistakes. And so developing some tolerance for that, in the end, thinking about specifically a 23-year-old child, I always say this to parents: you want to be a resource. You want to be their first call. You want to be a safe person. I had a parent ask me just today. They were talking about a child much younger than 23, and a child had heard something upsetting to her at school, and she'd come home to her parent to ask a question about it. Somebody was really sick at school, and there was a question. So she came home to her mother and saying, "Is everything going to be okay?" Basically, like what happens when somebody gets cancer or COVID? What should I expect? That's essentially what the child was asking, hoping for, I think, the answer that everything will be okay, which the mother was inclined to respond to her daughter with everything is going to be okay. And what I said to the mother was, I think the child isn't so much asking you if they're going to be okay and looking for some kind of answer. They're looking to see if you're afraid. We all know this. Do you remember when your young children fell on the ground when they were walking or running or playing? And you remember how they looked at you immediately and they're trying to read your face to see if they should cry and be scared themselves? Fundamentally, children look at us not for answers to questions about their life or about life. They look to us principally to see if they are okay, if they should be afraid. And if we come at them, this is why I think it's so critical and imperative that we do our work. They come at us to get a sense of our anxiety and fear, and we can't fake it. We can't hide it. And then they get a sense of if we're afraid, and if we're afraid, they have the feeling that they're in peril, that something's going wrong, that maybe even at a fundamental level that they're wrong. So your job is to find balance, serenity, support, strength, clarity, peace of mind somewhere else, so that when you're with the child, that doesn't get communicated. And here's the difficult thing. I said this to somebody. I say this all the time, but I was teaching somebody about this yesterday. Um, Not only are our children looking to us to get a sense about whether or not they're okay, but a child interprets the parents' anxiety as something's wrong with me. Something is fundamentally off with me. And it becomes a burden for them that they carry around. So it's important that we do our work. It's important that we do our project to maintain our serenity. It's important that we don't, most every parent that I've ever met, the most common idea in parenting that goes unobserved and unquestioned is this: most human parents communicate to the child, signal to the child, whether the child is doing poorly or well, through sharing their emotions. In other words, if you're my child, if I'm scared, sad, frustrated, worried, exhausted, angry, disappointed, you now know you're doing something wrong. It's not going well. If I'm happy, excited, proud, optimistic, serene, peaceful, and I communicate that to you, you now know you're doing something well. So most human parents that I meet raise children with that one idea, that I will tell you how I'm feeling, and then you will know how you're doing. My feelings will be your indication about whether or not you're on track or not. Then we do that over and over and over again. And then we ask questions like, I wonder why my child hasn't found themselves. I wonder why they don't know themselves. I wonder why they're so vulnerable or susceptible to peer pressure or trends or what society suggests to them. I wonder why they can't find their truth, figure out who they are. We wonder those things. And in some way, our incredulousness is intellectually dishonest, because we are the ones who taught them that how we feel is their best indication of how they're doing. So then they grow up in the world, they get wired, neurologically wired to believe what other people think and feel about them is about them. And it's not, and it never was. If you or your children find your way into Al Anon, one of the slogans you will hear, I love it. One of the slogans you will hear is, what other people think about you is none of your business. And I know this is dramatic. It might be bold to say based on some of the stages that you guys are at. That means it's true for your child. In other words, what you think about them is none of their business. Interestingly, the idea that I have in our program is we want your children to actually not be held down by what you think and feel. We want them to be able to hear it and understand it, maybe to consider it, what it might be teaching them, but anything more than that is abuse, plain and simple. And even though we might call it good abuse, it's still abuse. And for most of us, because most of the parents that come to our program are middle-aged. And because we're middle-aged, one thing we all have in common, we're trying to unburden ourselves of the opinions of others. I read something on social media today that said something along the lines of the easiest way to lose weight is to disregard other people's opinions of you. Get rid of what other people think of you. So that's kind of our goal. We want the child to kind of find themselves. And if the pressure of pleasing or impressing or disappointing or upsetting somebody else, especially a parent who loves them the most, if that comes to the forefront of the child's mind, the task of becoming a self is compromised. And becoming a self is the most important idea in building resiliency and mental health. It's being who you are, your authentic, real self. You all know that if you've listened to any of these, that my very favorite book on children is called The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. It was published, I believe, in 1980. It sold millions and millions and millions of copies. And most therapists, psychologists that I work with in my career place that at the top or near the top of their list of most influential books. So suffice to say, it is a worthy book for us to learn from. The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. And what Alice Miller says, even in the title, the subtitle of her book is The Search for the Real Self. And the basic idea that she says, and I believe is universal, is that a child will, the gifted child, right? The gifted child in her terms is the child who's able to anticipate, to sense what parents' needs are, and then give that to them. But the problem is giving other people what they need comes at the cost of the real or the authentic self. The goal in raising children is not to raise happy children, not even to raise successful children, but to raise real children who are going to be some combination of successful and failures, right? Some combination of excellence and stupidity. Some combination of emotionally resilient and dysregulated. Right? We want to raise real children or a healthy self. And that is the greatest contribution that a parent can make. But to do that, we've got to develop a capacity to provide a healthy attachment experience for our child, which means two things. We have to constantly understand our own wiring and programming and how faulty it was. Number one. Number two, we have to go to sources of strength and serenity and well-being and security so that we don't ask it of our children. And the powerful thing about our children, folks, our children are horrible at taking care of us. Our children are not reliable to take care of us. The children that end up at Evoke, they're not very good at it. In fact, they often do the exact opposite of what would make us feel okay and safe and well. So again, another long answer to a short question, but um, that's the thinking. That's the level of consciousness, right? We've got to get out of the question about what should I do or what levers should I flip or how much is the right way. All of that I understand it. I go to that place sometimes, but we've got to get to a different place where we realize something else is happening. We're not merely um, engineering good kids in the way that they should be, but we're helping them to figure it out themselves. And figuring it out yourself is the messiest journey that there is. I hope that gives some support or strength or insight. Can you speak about the best strategies for how to best communicate with a child with a language processing disorder and ADHD? Thank you. That's a part of this is I can't speak to language processing disorder um, specifically or at length. It's just not my area of expertise. We brought in, some of you might know, Sanford Shapiro, who's been a teacher and has run programs for children with learning disabilities for the last 30 or 40 years. And in his retirement, he's come on as an executive coach and consultant for Evoke therapy programs. And what he does is make sure that our curriculum speaks to children with different learning styles and learning differences, so that each assignment has a few ways that it can be completed. It can be completed orally, written, of course. It can be completed through art, through acting, by bullet points, right? So that it doesn't have to be full sentences, but just create an outline. Music, right? That they can do. They can write poetry. They can sing. They can do anything that they want. The idea is, I don't know the answer to the question about language processing specifically. I would refer you to Sanford, and he's happy to answer questions that you all have. But it's important to be flexible enough. I think the mistake that I've made as a therapist and a program director for years, one who directs the program, is that I have assumed that kids think like I do, which they don't, learn like I do, which they don't, and that if you just put a little bit more pressure on them or have a little bit more accountability, that they'll be able to accomplish things that they wouldn't otherwise accomplish, understand, comprehend things they wouldn't otherwise comprehend. That can help a little bit, but there's a breaking point where that kind of pressure becomes performance decreasing instead of performance enhancing. With ADHD, there are a lot of various combinations out there that you can look into. Again, contacting Sanford would be helpful, but scripts, breaking things down into shorter increments. I mean, with all of this, I think less is more. The problem with ADHD and language processing is they can't retain, they can't comprehend a lot of information. Like if they were listening to this broadcast tonight and you have a language processing disorder or ADHD, this broadcast is going to be a nightmare, right? Because I'm not answering questions simply, succinctly, with bullet points and really kind of tangible, concrete ways. I'm talking you through a way of thinking, which somebody with those issues would lose track of what I'm saying. Might not even, if they have a language processing issue, they might not even be able to hear or understand anything I'm saying. So those are some thoughts. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful, but somebody says, can you recommend a meaningful way to recognize my son's accomplishments at Evoke and encourage him on the next steps of his journey since we will not see him? We are so grateful to Evoke and especially Birgit. She gave our family, she saved our family and guided us through difficult life lessons. Encourage them lightly. When I was a young child, I played Little League baseball for 5 years. And I played volleyball in high school. And I remember when my parents would come to our games, our tournaments, I wanted them there, but I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want to hear their voice in the middle of it. And every child is different, but I like to use that analogy because I would say be their cheerleader, but we don't want them to hear your voice too much, right? Like we don't want that to be the focus, to be the focal point of their progress. And since it's not for you, and since what you think about them is in the long run not their business, it's just gentle. It's light. The other thing that's important with praise and encouragement is that too much praise will backfire when a child struggles. Because if you pay too much attention to the success, your lack of maybe saying anything when they fail will ring so loud in their ears they won't hear anything else. And so it's phrases like, that's really cool, or you could be proud of yourself, or how does that feel, or nice job. Light, less intense, also leaving room for the fact that the most important lessons that most of us learn are from failure. I mean, that's almost universal. There's actually um, neuroscience that supports it because the brain is wired to recognize and pay attention to negative signals more than positive signals. So I would say encourage and praise in such a way that it's more holistic, that you value the setbacks and the struggles and the mistakes as much as the successes, that you de-shame your children by not putting too much energy into the positives, into the successes. So lighter, quieter. Now, for some of you, that might feel like abandonment. That might feel like too much distance. What I will tell you is that's the way that it feels initially for a lot of people. But taking a step back is a critical contribution to a child's long-term development. Initially, you'll find this, all of us have seen this whenever we've tried to reduce our praise so that that's the evidence is not necessarily what we think or external validation. Our children have showed us their report cards, showed us how high they can jump, showed us their artwork. Right? They've been trained to make us proud. They've thought that is their job. So when you take a step back from that, it'll feel a little bit like a hole, like an emptiness. But over time, this shift in sensibility will develop a relationship that's more grounded. It's less based on anxiety and fear from the parent about the child's esteem. You know, the parent that writes an overly effusive letter, I will tell you that most students recognize that as anxiousness, as anxiety. And they don't absorb it the way that you would want them to. I was lecturing about this one time in person when we used to do that. And a father raised his hand. He said, I like to tell my child that I'm proud of him. And I said, how does you, I said to him, all I can really tell you is when my mother, who's turned 79 today, it's her birthday today, when my mother tells me that she's proud of me, it doesn't matter to me. That's not, it's not my job, and it's not why I do what I do. And we don't even share the same value system in many ways. And so it's not my focus. It's not my area. When I said this to the father, he said to me, actually, my son has told me the same thing. It doesn't matter to him. So light praise, embrace the struggles as much as the successes, and find new ways to communicate to your child when they're doing well or struggling, besides telling them how you feel, because it's not their job to feel happy. It's just not. And if that becomes their job, you can just imagine really, really easily the vulnerability that leaves in their personality structure toward abusive relationships or relationships that have unhealthy, powerful influence on them. Somebody asked the question, can you, and by the way, thank you, Malia. Malia's leaving you links of podcasts and various things as I talk, so I really appreciate that, Malia. The next question comes in. Could you please talk again about letting go of the outcome? How can we stay in the present without shrinking the worries about tomorrow? You know, our fear drives us. Um, Somebody said to me, it was actually a client said to me not too long ago, it's the difference between having wounds and your wounds having you. Um, you know, let's talk about this in the context of a couple. Let's say that you're my spouse, okay? And if I come to you and say, "Hey, last night the way you talked to me, it was really triggering for me. This is what went on for me. Um, I felt totally anxious and unwell all night. I didn't sleep well, and I know that's my work. I know that's my stuff, and I got to look at it. But I just want to tell you where I'm at. That's me having a wound, and you triggering it. But if I came to you, last night what you said to me was totally inappropriate. And I know that you don't love me. I know that you don't care. It comes up all the time in our conversations. We're talking to friends and you talk over me and you just don't respect me. And I don't feel safe in this relationship. I don't feel like this is a safe place to be. That's my wound having me. So fear is okay. It's not innately unhealthy. But if it takes over, I mean, this is the simplest thing I can say to you. Anything above moderate level intensity in terms of fear or anxiety triggers a fight or flight in your brain and reduces access to your prefrontal cortex, which is your reasoning, your flexible, the flexible part of your thinking center. So heightened fear creates something in the nervous system where you lose access to your best stuff. That's simple. So fear is the enemy. It's something in this task. It's something to grapple with. I play tennis. Not very good. I'm okay. Um, in high school, I was pretty good, but gotten a lot slower. I like more now. And so, if you played tennis, and if you haven't, you might be able to imagine this, but if you get nervous in tennis, you lose your power and your accuracy. Excuse me. You lose your power and your accuracy. When you are calm and you trust your swing, you have more power and more accuracy. That's the best example of letting go of the outcome that I can use. When you're afraid, you try to aim it. When you're confident or calm or less afraid, you lose all your accuracy. You don't get what you want out of it. Excuse me. Got a tickle in my throat. So letting go of the outcome means you're more honest. Why do we lie? We lie to control other people, don't we? To control what they feel, think, or do. So when you let go of the outcome, you tell the truth more. When you let go of the outcome, you're more authentic. When you let go of the outcome, you set healthier boundaries. When you're trying to control for outcomes, you lose authenticity, clarity, honesty. So letting go of the outcome is saying it's embracing it's embracing the reality in life that you can't control anybody. The only person you can come close to controlling is you. And so the shift, like I said to that earlier question, and like I talk about in my new book, is the shift is from being right and being good and even being successful. Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning says that if happiness becomes our goal, it will ruin our lives, because then we will avoid the important parts of life that are part of our connection, like grief and sorrow and pain. So the goal is to be you. The goal is being willing to realizing and living with the axiom that I talk about all the time, which is you don't get to win anymore. You really don't. You just get to choose how to lose. I mean, I almost want to get that tattoo. You don't get to win. You get to choose how to lose. And ideally, that empowers you and frees you up. Now, with these podcasts, with my books, with the psychoeducation, when I do therapy with people, I am trying to get people to think about things in more nuanced ways, right? No more a higher level of consciousness, because that thought process will reveal the answer for you. I was just telling somebody today, getting divorced or staying married is not the answer. Getting divorced is not the answer to the problem. Getting married is not the answer to the problem. Taking your child home is not the answer to the problem. Kicking your child out of the house is not the answer to the problem. The answer to the problem is who are you and what do you need? What's your relationship? A mother said to me years ago, how can you encourage a mother to kick her child out of the home when the possible outcome is death? And I said, I could never tell a mother to kick her kid out of the house. I would never take on that role. That's way too great of a burden for me to assume. And besides the fact that it's actually unethical. I know you don't get told that all the time, but it's unethical for therapists to advise you in major life decisions. That's part of our ethical guidelines for all of us. But what we can do is we can tell you how to think about it. The answer is not in the decision. The answer is in finding your truth. Out of that truth will come your answer. So when the mother said to me, how can you tell a mother to kick a kid out of the house? For example, a kid who's addicted to drugs when the possible outcome could be death. My response to her was, I wouldn't do that. I would help the mother heal her codependency, which is a pop psychology term that just means figuring out how to be a healthy self and in relationship to somebody else. I would help her or him heal their codependency so that they would make the decision that's right for them. I don't tell you to kick your 23-year-old child out of the house. I help you heal your codependency, and then you know what to do. I don't tell you to get a divorce. I help you figure yourself out, and then you decide if you want to stay married or not. And I really don't even tell you whether or not you should take your child home after Evoke. I teach you about the dynamics involved in your child's issues and your relationship with your child and your relationship to their issues, and then you make the decision for the next step. Someone says, my child changed pronouns in therapy. How often does this revert back when home? More than it used to. Again, I'm using the same metaphor, maybe for a different thing, but my child is, I have a transgender child. Some of you might know that. I have decided that I'm going to support them in where they need to go, and I don't know where that is. I'm going to have my boundaries, and first and foremost, about what I feel comfortable with, but in terms of their trajectory in life, of discovering who they are, that's theirs to figure out. So my child has changed their name a couple of times. They also went from being non-binary and being they and them to being him and his. And I just go with it. That's the idea, is that you hold it lightly. I had a parent describe it when they were talking about their transgender child. They said they were agnostic toward their child, which they said, I know that might not be the best word, but that's the way I feel about it, is I don't hold an opinion one way or the other. And that's really what I'm encouraging. I have parents tell me that's insane. Some parents tell me, when I first heard you say out loud that it is your goal and aspiration not to have an opinion about your child's life trajectory, about their life choices, I thought you were crazy. I thought, they tell me, that was my primary job. But that's not the primary job of being a parent. The primary job of being a parent is being a self. And that means living authentically and honestly and courageously and clearly. And then obviously there are boundaries. And if you're under 18, you live in my house, there are going to be more boundaries. And if I'm supporting you financially, there are going to be boundaries associated with that. But in terms of getting really rigid about my idea about how you should be living your life, I don't get to do that. In through this lens of psychology that we talk about at Evoke, that's not the deal. Next question. My son went to wilderness therapy a few weeks ago. He turned 18 on Saturday and is now talking about discharging himself. We have said we aren't going to come and get him if he leaves. Any advice? Um, they always threaten that. Always, 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 always. So that's par for the course. They're testing the waters. They're calling your bluff. And so, like I said before, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you find your truth, find out what's true for you, what you can support and what you can't, and then follow through. And I wouldn't encourage you to bluff. I would encourage you to state clearly your boundary. And again, I assume your child is in our program in wilderness therapy if you're attending this live. So that even goes for the Evoke therapist. They don't get to tell you what to do. They get to say, here's what I'm recommending based on your child's issues and the context that he or she would go home to. This is what we think will be the most helpful for them. But you have to decide it. So I will tell you that many, almost all children threaten to walk away. And most of the time, when parents hold firm boundaries, children don't walk away. And most of the time, they engage in the recommended therapeutic support and it helps them, but not always. So there are no guarantees. So, I'll take a moment just this evening just to say, because I think it's an important part of the work that we do. I say this at the end of every broadcast. Attend Al-Anon if you haven't. If you haven't attended 6 meetings of any combination of Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous or Families Anonymous or even ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, which really should just be called Adult Children of Parents, because the alcoholic aspect of it does not qualitatively separate itself from other parenting mistakes and idiocies. It's just growing up with human parents. All of these programs aren't designed to fix your alcoholic parents or your alcoholic kid or your alcoholic spouse or your ASD spouse or your ASD kid or your depressed or your anxious kid. That's the hook that I think probably gets most people to walk into those meetings, is that I'm going to get a set of strategies from Al-Anon or Coda that are going to help me kind of fix what's going wrong in my life. But all they do is give you a strategy for living in peace and serenity and confidence. And then from that place of peace and serenity and confidence, you are more capable of being a parent, a healthy attachment-based parent, or a healthy attachment-based spouse. These are really important questions, and I really mean this. No therapist ought to be telling you what to do. They ought to be making recommendations based on what they know and what their experiences that tends to help. But to get farther or deeper or more intense into that with important life decisions, like what to do with an 18-year-old who's threatening to leave, or co-parenting issues that could end up in divorce, for example, or dealing with a child who's home with depression or substance abuse or other dangerous behaviors, we can't take that on. And you can't ultimately get yourself out of the reality that you're ultimately responsible for the decisions that you make. Next question. Is wilderness therapy an opportune time to ramp down or remove meds, or is it preferable to keep them consistent? Yes and yes. It's an opportune time to reevaluate. It's an opportune time to reduce or change medication. To begin, when children come into our program, when I say children, I mean young adult or adolescent children. When they come into our program, our default position is we're not going to change anything to begin. And that's just good science. You don't want to introduce two large variables into a person's life and then not know which one is having the effect. So arriving at Evoke or wilderness therapy and changing meds at the same time, who knows what's having the effect on them in those early weeks. But after some kind of baseline and pattern is established, 3 or 4 weeks in, then we can start to talk about how your child's medicated. And we can talk to our lead psychiatrist. We can talk to, they can have meetings via Skype or in person. They can start to reevaluate. The therapist at Evoke can consult with the psychiatrist, and we can get you that new idea or that new recommendation. So we start off with what is already happening. A few weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks into it, then we can talk about adjusting medication one way or the other. That's our default. And again, it's just good science. You would never introduce two significantly, potentially impactful variables into a study at the same time. You would learn nothing because you would have no idea whether to attribute the positive or the negative response to the one variable or the other. So I'm not sure. Somebody's asking a question about Revere Health in Utah. Is this a doctor who would have seen my son for physical? I know the name of the doctor, but I'm not sure if that's it. We'll have to get back to you. Malia, take down this person's name so I can answer that question more specifically, because that name doesn't jump out for me, but it might be the name of a billing company or the name of an organization that one of our doctors belong to. Because on our website, they're just our doctors, but they also have, they work in other places and clinics and so forth. Someone says, can I get one of the wilderness therapists to work with my child remotely when he is home? We do have a coaching program. So if you're interested in remote, contact Travis at evoketherapy.com. You can go to our website. Not all of our therapists make themselves available for virtual therapy / coaching with clients, but that is an option for many of them. So contact Travis at evoketherapy.com or go to our coaching website and you can start to kind of peruse the names of the people there and see if your therapist is there. But Travis at evoketherapy.com. Travis at evoketherapy.com is the one to contact to have to see if our therapist is available for remote virtual coaching / therapy. Are there any questions? Any other questions? Someone says, do they circle back to the same campsites, or are those always moving to new campsites? They usually visit a campsite more than once, yeah. They're kind of going in circles out there. We're moving from our summer area to our winter area right now. So they're going to be in miles and miles and miles away. They have to actually be transported in some cases. But if not, they take this long cross-country hike to a new part of the field that has different elevation, different weather patterns, and so forth. So yes, they're kind of going around in circles and coming back, and we move field areas from winter to summer and summer to winter. Someone says, is happy I love you mail other than the requested letters acceptable? Of course. You know, let me say something about that. I'll repeat that question. I think you can all see it. But it says, a parent asks, is happy, quote, I love you mail other than the requested letters acceptable? Of course. As always. Some of you might have read my second book where I tell the story about a parent who wrote a letter that said 50 reasons why I love you. Um, and on the surface, that letter seemed wonderful. In fact, it was 50. In the book, I said 25 because I thought nobody will believe me if I say 50, but it was 50. And when I read it with the child and I brought it up to the parent, um, with just a little digging, the the child felt manipulated and put off by it because it was just the parent's neediness and anxiety. So more important than what you say is why you say it. So I love you is wonderful if it's an expression of your feelings, but if it's, I say it this way: you can't control whether a child feels loved. You can only love them. You can't control whether somebody trusts you. You can only be honest. You can't control whether a child feels wanted and welcomed and heard. You can only be present and listen to them. And I know that might be nitpicking, but it's actually really, really, really important. You can't make a child feel loved. You can only love them. So as you consider what you do and don't say to your child, if you're trying to control them, you can never get it right. And if you're doing it from a place of authenticity and love, you can almost never do it wrong. All right. I'm going to finish before the top of the hour so everybody has an opportunity if they want to, and I want to, attend the presidential debate. We have a huge voting initiative at Evoke, and so we are supporting all of our therapists and our clients who will be 18 during the general election to register and vote and to be informed. If you want to do a deep dive, look at our intensives on our website. We have wonderful attachment-based intensives, both in person and online. Email intensives@evoketherapy.com. If you want to do a pursuits trip, either between Evoke and the next step, or maybe long after, think about therapy light or kind of reconnecting and recharging. We have 3 to 30-day custom programming for adults and for families. We have alumni support groups online for both wilderness clients and intensive families. Go to our website. The next one for wilderness families will be, actually, it's happening right now. So, it's next Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And for alumni, will be November 10th. Email Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. Like I said, we ask all parents to attend 6 12-step support groups. All of these broadcasts are available on your podcast app. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also find her on Twitter and Instagram. Find us on Twitter and Instagram or Facebook. You could also go to the EvokeFamilyFoundation.org if you want to give support people that can't afford therapy, or the Evoke Therapy blog has new content. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are both available online on Amazon. And we'll send you an email blast soon letting you know when our next broadcast will be. So I'm going to wrap this up right here, folks. Have a great evening. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. I'll answer the questions in our next live Q&A, which will be 2 webinars from now. Take care, folks. Have a great evening and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.